Welcome to our webinar on safety through cultures, specifically looking at how leaders shape human performance. I've got some fabulous speakers with me today. We are going to be looking at, with those speakers, we're going to be looking at why people may want to do the right thing, but when under pressure, something in the system makes that harder for them to do. So we're going to be looking at that today. And as I say, we've got some fabulous speakers. We've got Tony-Gowers-Jones as our keynote speaker. Now, Tony has led corporate and operational HSE functions in oil, gas, rail, utilities, and he's got a global experience that spans the UK, Middle East, Europe, Africa, Australia, the US, the Far East, and Central America. I think we can say it covers the globe. So Tony's known for driving behavioural change at that executive management, but also frontline level, helping organisations strengthen their safety culture to reduce risk and also to improve performance. His leadership experience includes some of the UK's largest programmes. So to name a few, West Coast Route Modernisation, which was 8.9 billion, the Western Region Upgrade, 3.5 billion, and 2 1 billion offshore wind farms. So welcome, Tony. We're going to be also joined later by Dave Garner, who is the Director of Health and Safety and Environment at Cadent, who will bring very much an operational leader perspective, as well as Rebecca Eaton from Cadent, who is the Occupational Health and Wellbeing lead. So we'll bring in that interesting angle of what this means from a wellbeing perspective as well. So we're in for a really rich discussion, and I just want to start with this term that has now started to do the rounds, HOP, human operational performance. Tony, tell us about that phrase before we then get into the meat of some of the questions we've got.
Okay, so one of the big issues with safety is always what people do. And you hear the term human operational performance being talked a lot on the internet on discussions. Now, human operational performance actually probably has its foundation roots back in the 1980s and 1990s with Professor Jim Reason's fantastic book on human error, which is a core that brought a lot of stuff together, and it brought Professor Rasmussen's work on human error. And it's really interesting to look at, because if you look at the basis of it, there's a couple of fundamental things. One of them is embraced in the tripod accident causation theory, and it's people come to work to do a good job. Fundamental belief that we have. And if they don't do a good job, it's because of the environment we place them in. Now, Rasmussen took that and basically came up with three sort of big areas of of types of error, and then you come later to why. First of all is sort of automatic processing, slips and laps, you didn't mean to do it, and suddenly they, oh God, why did I do that? Mistakes, where people actually think they're doing the right thing, and that's fine, because when they get a counterindication, they will actually correct themselves. So those two are pretty well known. Lots of work on the human factors that bring those two together and control those. Non-compliance is probably the most dangerous one. And the reason it's more dangerous is that if you're non-compliant, any signals that you're doing the wrong thing, you'll ignore because you already know you're doing the wrong thing. Okay.
Right.
And one of the biggest drivers is people doing the wrong thing because they actually firmly believe that the organization wants them to do that thing. Yeah. Whether it's normally not explicitly, but implicitly. And it's because of either the situation or the messages that leaders send out. So let me give you a couple of examples. One of the things, I've always worked in a business where if it goes wrong, you're on the front page of the newspapers. And we were with the West Coast Route Mod one New Year when we overran our possession of the railway. So we had the main line out of Euston closed at Rugby, so nothing to Glasgow, Birmingham coming in that direction. And we were due back on, I think, 3rd of January, and we had a complete mess up. We didn't come back till 5 days late. Okay, you're then in a situation, and this would have been about the 26th, as we knew we were right in it. You've got the Times hiring helicopters to put you on the front page of the Sunday Times because they want their photographs overhead. You're replanning the work and doing it. We're now creating a situation where there is intense pressure on the guys on the ground.
Yeah.
Now, in that situation, I looked at my team, I spoke to my team, we understood the behaviour models, and we just looked to say, so what levers can we pull? And one of my HC leaders from further up, a little bit further up the railway, they just completed, got their bit of railway back, said, we just need to flood it with people. We just need our people on the ground, just walking around and talking to people and saying, I know it's a problem. I know we're under pressure. We are under pressure. But if you have an accident, that's going to slow things down. So just that old Latin stuff, heste, lente, I think it's called. Apologise for my pronunciation. So we basically then flooded it. We brought teams down from other places, 24 hours, made sure we just had people walking around talking to people. That was all. Everyone knew we were absolutely in a serious pressure situation. And sure enough, we got the railway back. There was a House of Commons Select Committee inquiry into all of those overruns. And my boss, who was an American, had always wanted to visit the House of Commons, but this wasn't quite the way he wanted to do it, as giving witnesses. But one thing he could go in and say is, despite all this pressure, despite everything we did, we got the railway back without cutting a finger, because we'd worked out what was the risk. And we looked, and we only had one lever to control, and that was people personally talking to people constantly. And that one example. Another example I'll give, back in the mid-80s, I was working in the Middle East. I had one of the best CEOs that I have ever worked for. He was completely dedicated to safety. He was probably, I'd work for him anywhere in the world. He was brilliant. Yeah. And in those days, we used to do times without a lost time incident. Everyone would laugh at it now, but I'm talking 40 years ago, and it was all about visibility and stuff like that. And sure enough, we'd done something like 6 months. And when you've got an organization in the Middle East with 5,000 staff and 25,000 contractors, and you haven't had a lost time incident for 6 months, that was actually world renowned in that particular situation. What was it? We had a situation where one of the guys rang me up and said, one of my guys has got a lost time incident. He was closing a gate and he dropped a bolt, and the bolt fell just the wrong side of his safety boot. He went home, staff member, came in the next day, went to the company doctor. The company doctor said, that's a pretty bad bruise, nothing broken, but you need time off to rest. Okay, so it's a lost time incident. Medical, time off, rest. No questions about it. Sent the boss back, rang the MD. Now, Mike was brilliant. He was absolutely great. He went ballistic. And remember, there was no bonus attached to anything in these days. Didn't attach bonuses. This was self-imposed. He rang the chief medical officer and asked which stupid doctor gave him time off. Yeah. The doc then was contacted by the MD, and the doc went, oh my God, I didn't realize it was at work. I'd have told him to go back and wouldn't have given him the time off. Now, these are actually really, really good people, but we've now created an environment where they really are behaving in crazy ways. Yeah. And these are good people doing it. And it's a self-imposed environment. You'll be pleased to know later that night, because it happened to be the equivalent of Friday night in the UK, in the Middle East. I was in the bar and Mike was growling at me. And I did remind him, would you prefer something as ridiculous as this to set it off? Because Mike, this whole range of this 6 months has created an environment where I am absolutely sure people are not reporting incidents. And I guarantee you in the next 3 weeks, we're going to see 3 or 4 minor little lost time incidents. And remember, last time we were in this situation, the record went by a fatal road accident. Would you prefer a stupid little thing bruise or that? So I did get my point out of him at the end of the day. He did suddenly grudgingly go, you're right, and calm down. But isn't it fascinating how brilliant MDs, we can create an environment where their behavior goes weird. And it is the unintended consequences of our leadership behaviors, good leaders behaving in a way that they think is positive, that is the biggest danger in creating an environment where people will actually take shortcuts, not comply, not report incidents in this case, or take a shortcut in work. And what I think is the key question I'd like to bring for David and the rest of the team here, is what can leaders do so that they can get that feedback when they are creating unintended consequences? What do we need to do for the environment that leaders sit in, that they're open and actually look to that feedback? Because what many leaders out there don't do is that they don't look for that feedback, because of course it's negative. People don't go out, turkeys don't vote for Christmas. But we need to create an environment and teach leaders how to get that feedback. And that's the real question I'd like to leave with David. And perhaps he'll pick up.
Let's see whether he does when we get to speak to David. Brilliant. I mean, fantastic to hear these topics brought to life with real examples. So we do have, this is a quick pause, we've got both a chat and a QA function on today's webinar. If you'd like to use the chat for chat, fantastic, introduce yourselves, have a chat with other participants. But if you could use the Q&A for posing any questions that you might have, we are definitely going to leave some time for some Q&A at the end of the session. So by all means, put some questions in there for any of our speakers today. So unintended consequences, Tony, this idea that an environment is created and possibly for the good, but actually the unintended consequence is actually quite negative. But I think there is a sense that quite often people think non-compliance or errors is the person's, the employee's problem rather than it being a system problem. Leaders are often misreading that they're looking to the person and not really at the system and the environment they've created. Do you think that is one of the key drivers of errors and non-compliance?
So I think one of the things is the fact that leaders need to understand the causation path. And it was Philip Albert Wagner in the 1980s that produced what's called now the tripod causation path, that is fundamentally built into whatever hot program you look at. And it is that belief that controls are not in place because people don't do the actions that are needed. That can be close, that can be a long way before the incident. It can be the designer not applying a code of practice. It could be the maintainer skipping a step in a testing organization, or it could be somebody not doing a lockout and tag. So it can be immediate, close to an incident, or it can be years in advance. But people do things that they removes a control, and they do it because of the environment we're placed in. And that can be the time pressures. It can be a lot of other things. It can be focusing on different things. So you're being sent something called incompatible goals. And you then, as leaders, we create those environments. Let me give you one example that's in fairly public domain. The maternity scandal at Telford. Do you understand that just before that broke, that hospital was being actually praised for doing natural births, as being a leader in doing natural births. Now, I firmly believe that focus on one particular performance indicator, which is a good performance indicator, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's to the detriment. It created the environment where they just didn't look at other stuff. And it is this focusing on a specific performance indicator, and it's not just across safety, it's totally across everything. Go back to Tesco's and their balance books for a few years ago, where they put stuff in the wrong columns of the balance book. Yes. You remember that one?
I do.
Absolutely. We created an environment where people did the wrong thing.
And it's this idea, isn't it, that a metric, when this happens, it's perhaps that a KPI metric is in isolation, or it's taken to an extreme at the exclusion of others. And I guess, I'm thinking about one of the clients we work with, a major subcontractor who has the pressure of client. They deliver to a client, and that brings a whole other pressure, being able to serve the client. So you mentioned in the design of programs, there may be something far upstream that then has an impact downstream in implementation, which makes it less likely that you can avoid errors and compliance. Is that something that you've seen in your career?
Oh yeah, it took us so long when we were designing safety systems in the offshore platforms to embrace new technology, because safety systems required you to hardwire everything through. So we designed safety systems, and the law said you had to hardwire safety systems. Yeah, on that, until someone pointed out on one gas leak on a platform that the operator was suspected to react. Yeah, when he had 5,000 alarms going off within the first 15 seconds, which he had to acknowledge. Yeah, I mean, that was the situation in 1990. Hardwire safety systems, you had a gas leak, 5,000 alarms in 15 seconds, and you expected an operator to react to it. Yeah, pardon? Crazy. Yeah?
Yes, yeah.
And the law was being driven by the law at that stage, because it was a legal requirement. So yeah, you can push these things on design. It can happen at design. It can happen absolutely at the immediate safety briefing. I need this done. I need it done quickly, and you create that pressure. Yeah. Is there any way we can get this done more efficiently? Now, a good thing to say, beware, you are creating an environment where you're encouraging and rewarding non-compliance. How many of you people on this call has actually saying, when the teams come back and completed work perhaps a day or two earlier, you had a 5-day job and they got it done a day or two earlier, and how many of you have gone and congratulated them and said, brilliant, well done? Yeah. And how many asked, how many shortcuts on safety did you take to achieve that? Because you don't ask that question, do you? So you reward non-compliance.
So what, as a leader, should be rewarded, overtly rewarded, to give that very clear signal that it isn't about efficiency to the detriment of safety?
So I think as a leader, you constantly have to have this sort of unnerving, what's out there that I don't know? It's this questioning mind. Yeah. What am I not being told? What's out there that I don't know? All right. And it's this questioning mindset in leaders we need to care to say there is always news about safety, and some of it will be bad. So if you're not hearing something bad, the alarm bell should go off. That's absolutely, I'm not hearing something bad about safety. Why not? All I'm hearing is good news. Yeah. It should be absolutely. When you're looking at a dashboard, it's one of my big crunches. If you've got a really good team, and most industries are really well run with really good teams that are dedicated, and we manage these scorecards, and they're usually red, amber, and green. And what leaders do is they focus on the reds. Yeah? I think it's totally the wrong behavior. It does two things. One, it sends out a message that reds are bad, and actually, if your team's telling you it's red, I will guarantee that they've got a plan to change it. They know what the problem is. They're on the top of it. If they're a good team, they've got all that covered. Yeah, because they're good. Right. So focus on greens. Why are they green? And this is constantly questioning the what don't I know. Yeah. Forget the reds. I've worked with leaders that don't do red. We've all worked with leaders that don't do red. Yeah. Focus on the green and question, why is it green? What am I not knowing? What's in there that I don't know, that you're not telling me? And you then create a completely different approach from your team. One, you trust them that when they tell you something is wrong, that they will actually have a plan. So your only question on red is, what help do you need from me?
Yeah.
That's the only question you need to ask on a red. What help do you need from me? Completely different approach, and it creates such a different tone to that team. And it doesn't matter whether you're the chairman of the board or the CEO. If you just say, what do you need to help me? You'll start to see more reds. Because they'll actually be honest. Some of those ambers will suddenly turn to red, because they know by doing that, they can get your support to fix what needs fixing, because people are good people and want to do the right thing. So one tip I'd do is forget the reds, focus on the greens if you want a single tip.
And that's great in the sense of what you're describing is curiosity. And in any leader, you want a leader who is not looking, where can I place the blame? Who is going to get punished? But actually, what can we learn by being curious to then make an improvement, or, as you say, mitigate what what a red is presenting. So a real trait of a leader, therefore, particularly in health and safety, is to constantly be looking for information and feedback and being curious, rather than perhaps looking where they can place the blame when things do go wrong. Because as you say, and as we said right at the beginning, it invariably isn't the person, it's the system within which they're working. So the culture.
Yeah. Is that welcome bad news?
Yeah.
You've got to welcome bad news. When someone brings you bad news, your first thing out your mouth should be thank you.
Wow.
Just that.
So how many times do you, I mean, this is obviously just a personal opinion, but do you think most health and safety leaders are doing that? Saying thank you for highlighting where things are going wrong?
I won't talk. That's an interesting thing. You said health and safety leaders there. Yeah. I just talk about leadership.
Okay.
Yeah. Operational leadership, everyone. No, it's not. It's probably not the most common. Yeah. I do think we do need to look at the environment that leaders are placed in. What are shareholders pressuring on them? What are government pressuring on them? There's a whole bunch of stuff out there. Because remember, the whole of HOP, when they talk about it, is the usually focused on the front end, or the person doing the work. Yeah, and the pressure's on them. Yeah. Now, this may sound a little bit strange, and I don't want people to get worried about this, but actually, CEOs, COOs, Chief Operational Officers, Chief Scientific Officers, they are actually human. And surprise, surprise, they have external pressures. I will always exclude CFOs because I'm still unsure about that. Yeah, but they're human as well, and there's pressures on them. They've come to work to do a good job. So I think there's a huge amount of work to do looking at the pressures on them and how they react to those pressures, because I'm sure it was all shareholder pressure and analysis pressure that created the pressure for those leaders in Tesco's to accept that one. It would be the way that the analysts were looking at, they were all giving buy recommendations and stuff like that. I'm absolutely confident that pressure created the behaviour where we went, oh, yeah, we could probably do that and meet the targets.
Yeah. And as you say, pressure is a major factor. It does make us behave in ways which actually, if we were being more rational or we're taking a pause and reflecting, we may not behave in that way, which, is absolutely the reason why the human factors in leadership and then what is expected of operatives, frontline, etc. It has to take account of the human side of those who are working for you. And I think that let's come to the human that is Dave Garner then. So what does it mean in a leadership position, particularly within Cadent Gas? And I'm going to throw at you, Dave, if I may, the question, almost the challenge really, that Tony posed around how do leaders prevent these unintended pressures or just unintended environments, and how do they get better feedback? How are they able to listen better to the information that really is coming from those who are on that front line?
Okay, well, look, felt incredible listening to Tony for the last 20 minutes or so. I always enjoy it. I mean, the first bit was going through my head. It started with the pressures on the organisation. Then Tony said something else, and it sent my mind in a slightly different direction. Society in general creates some of this for us. I'll get back to the leader's role in this in a second. There's this notion. I think there's a notion in society. Tomorrow's always going to be better than today. There's this. I think there's a belief. If I sort of watch my children and look at what they consume, I think they have a notion about tomorrow. I think there are societal pressures put on people in general. I don't think social media helps in that. The filters and optics people put on life and their lives and the expectation it creates. So I think there's this notion. If I think about us, if I think about Cadent for a second, or the gas industry, that sort of flows through. So we work through periods, regulatory price periods where we're told what we can spend and what we can earn and those things. And there's a notion baked in there that tomorrow will be cheaper than today, driven off what customers expect. What does society expect? There's this general sense of, well, I want my energy for less, and I want it to be greener, and I want all of these things that, if we're truly honest, things that don't neatly sit together or fit together or work. So then you've got to think, so what's a leader's role in all this? The first thing is I think you seek to understand. It gets back to, I think at that level you have to seek to understand what's going on and what's being asked and the pressures, and think that through down to the point at which work is done, things are happening that enable you to deliver whatever service it is. In our case, we're looking to move gas around the country, but whatever that is. So I think you need to understand, and I think the next piece, one of the next bits is to internalize that. I think you have to internalize it, and then work out how to contextualize for people what that means. Setting the context, I think, is all important. I was then thinking about, so what's you sort of said, and Dave Garner is, so what's my job in all of this within Cadent? Protecting and looking after people. That's my job. It's not some fancy title. It's to protect and look after people. It's a human thing. And where does that start? Helping them understand the world in which they're operating, the hazards that they face, the consequences of things, and in a way that doesn't frighten them. That's the last thing I want to do. I don't want anyone frightened, but I want them to clearly understand and be respectful of what they're working with. I can always remember being a young boy on the beach, and Dad saying, respect the sea. Don't fear it. Respect the sea. The power of nature. Don't just respect it. And it's that sort of that notion that it starts from. It's then contextualizing it against other things. So back to the context piece. The expectations of us as an organisation are that we do a number of things simultaneously. It's ands, not ors. It has to be safe. We operate major accident hazard assets, and the consequences are pretty clear, I think, for folk listening to this. It has to be safe. The operation has to be safe for the person. The asset needs to be left in great condition so it can operate safely, for people living, working around it, taking gas from it. It has to be efficient. Back to that, what do people expect? People are paying for us, so we have to do that efficiently. The service we provide to customers, and people are paying us. They're paying us a lot of money to do what we do, and the same with all the energy networks. We have to deliver that serve them well, respectfully, politely. We have to do it in a way where we're not further damaging the environment. We've done plenty of that over the decades. We need to be thinking about how we shift how we work, decarbonise. We've got to do all of these things at the same time, and how you explain that is really important. What I've seen us try and do that. I've seen us do it. I've seen us do it well. I've seen us, learn from it. Where sometimes we overlean on one of the levers. We'll talk lots about the customer, and people will take that to a certain, as Tony was talking about, you take that to a certain degree at the expense of, and it's about equilibrium and balance. To be successful, for us to be successful, you've got to have all of that, and contextualizing that and helping people think that through, I think is the start. Listening. So once you've said that, you need to listen, have people understood. If you hear back, it's always find it interesting. I always find it interesting. I bet Tony's had lots of this. Dave says this and Tony said that, and you think, well, I never did say this and I never did say that. So understanding what's been said, more importantly, understanding what people have heard, what you say and what people hear are not always the same things, frequently not the same things. In some instances, you may never have said the things that people have heard. So that's always an interesting one.
Or in the interpretation, because you're right.
Well,
Communication
it be interpretation, or you just never said it in the first place. But through myth and legend, things get created in organisations. It's fascinating how some of these things start out. But you've got to listen. And they're
also normalised as well. You know, certain things. For example, there may be a myth. But soon it becomes almost like legendary, where actually that is the fact, that is how we do it. And I think that's sometimes where you get the drift, the behaviour drift. This is just the new way we do it. This is now the normal way that we do it. And I kind of want to sort of pick on your internalisation and your contextualisation. You know, some of the incidents that could happen hardly ever do or never do. And yet your people have to be ready to respond. Now that makes, in particular, where, you know, there is a high risk, but a low likelihood of something happening. How do you deal with that, where people are not being exposed to it enough to perhaps be able to respond in the way that you would like them to? How do you tackle that?
I think what shot into my mind when you started asking that was, so I think as humans, we've seen lots of things over the years. There are lots of parallels to what we do. So I had a meeting earlier this week, and we started with looking back to get people's minds in the right place. We looked back at Challenger, the shuttle disaster. And why? Because one of the team had been out to Florida, and they got a photo of Artemis 2, and it was on the launch pad, and they missed it going by 24 hours. But we talked about Challenger, and we talked about pressures. We talked about how NASA's funding was dropping, and they were trying to get TV ratings, and a teacher was put on, and then it had to go. It had to go, and yet there were, you know, most people will know and heard about the O-ring and the weather conditions, and we talked about that, and you then start to bring that into our world. So you start finding the parallels. So okay, so we're not looking at TV ratings, but you end up with those. How do you bring those parallel pressures in and start to imagine in your mind, start to imagine what that would be like and how you'd react? There was a great quote at the end of the slides. Lack of evidence is not evidence of safety, which I've said 3 times since that meeting with other members of the team. So when we're thinking about how we transition energy, the importance of research, not just repackaging it and rehashing, but going back to first principles, understanding it and doing your homework right, to evidence what you're doing is so important. So I think you know, one thing that humanity is great at is storytelling. We're great at it. We've done it for millennia, haven't we?
Yes.
And I think that is a huge part of it. Bringing these examples in and finding the parallels. There's lots, you know, as an industry, we've got a long history, and we've got lots of internal examples, but as good as, and sometimes better, is when you look out and you look for the challenges, and you look for things like that, and you start to learn. You learn from that, and you pull those threads back in and help people see the world through those eyes.
So on this theme of stories, because I know we've worked with you on creating stories and presenting those stories, because obviously these stories need to land with all of your employees, not just sort of as a theoretical model at leadership level. How has bringing those stories to life internally within Cadent really worked for you?
Well, I suppose the first bit, so I have the basic belief: organizations can't learn, only people can. And people, I believe people learn through emotion.
Yeah,
that's my belief. But deep learning is an emotional. I think it's an emotional process. So you know, the stuff we've done, Eileen, with you is to create narratives, to create stories, to bring them to life, to make them emotional, to get people to sit and think deeply about their role within the organisation, and to do it in a way where they They understand that they're part of a bigger system. I'm part of it. We're all part of a system, and understanding that you're in a system and your role within that, and the implications, not just in the moment, but the ripple implications of your thoughts, your deeds, your decisions, and how they play through an organisation. Helping people to think deeply about that is changing conversation in the organisation. People, you know, I often think one of the success measures, and when I watch people and I see more conversations happening, I see people talking to people that they weren't talking to before, because they're making a connection. They're making a mental and emotional connection between what they do and what someone else does, and how that sums and adds to the output of the organisation.
Yeah, amazing. I'm going to bring Rebecca in now. I think it's really important to look at, you know, what impact some of this pressure that we talk about in the system, because, you know, we're never going to be able to get rid of the pressure that is in a system. You know, we are in a corporate environment. There are targets, there are deadlines, etc. So I guess, Rebecca, what's that looking like in people? So either in stress or distraction, or possibly presenteeism, their confidence to speak up because of the deadlines they've got to face. What's that looking like for you, and certainly in the context of safety?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to use the metaphor that you've probably heard before around boiling a frog. And pressure often will build up very slowly, very gradually. We don't notice it. We don't notice the impact that it's having on ourselves. And then as it gradually builds up, it builds up so gradually that it gets to the point where the frog doesn't jump out because it doesn't notice. But from a human perspective, what starts to happen is things start to fail. So as pressure increases, we become more and more blinkered because we're focusing. So that stops us from noticing the things that might have gone wrong. It also stops us looking at innovation, but it also stops us talking and allowing time to do that questioning, that critical thinking, to get feedback. And I think, you know, it is that thing of, we've got to learn to turn the heat down sometimes, because if we continue this pressure on people, then we do lose that ability where they start seeing things where we're asking for feedback, and this stuff takes time, and the more and more pressure we put on people, the less time we get to reflect and get it right. And we talked a lot about that pressure, but also that burnout is, you know, something that's talked about a lot now, and we need to start noticing that impact on people, because if we continue to put the pressure on, there comes a stage where they can't jump out, where they become burnt out. So we need to enable people to recharge. That's a really, really important part of looking after people. And we are talking about humans. You know, humans have lots going on, both in work, outside of work, and we need to acknowledge both the internal pressures that people have got and the external pressures, and acknowledge that they're humans. They come to work to do a job, but they are human beings, they're not robots, and we need to treat people as humans.
Yeah, and presumably there is a huge role that line managers, supervisors, and also leaders can play in all of this, because if we want people to be authentically human and feel they can have a human response, that context has got to be there, as Tony was explaining, in terms of the system, the culture within which they're operating. So how do the leaders at any level within an organization achieve that?
So leaders have to show vulnerability themselves, because their employees are not going to show their own vulnerability if their leaders aren't. And I've often seen this in senior leaders. They're very reluctant to say that they are suffering from stress, because it's seen as a failure, as a weakness, that they're not able to do their job. but actually we all need to show some vulnerability, because that's when, you know, we are human. So, you know, we are all at some point going to need that support and care. And that's fine. And we've got to create the environment. And unless people start to show that vulnerability, you're never going to get there.
Yeah. And you know, we talk a lot about creating the environment for this to happen. What can we practically do to make sure that that environment is present, so an employee can speak up and either challenge something, point at something not being safe, or admit that they are overwhelmed, nearing burnout? What's that environment look like? How are they going to do? How's the manager do that?
Yeah. So first thing is spotting signs. So, you know, spotting signs that people are not necessarily acting like they would normally act. Things aren't being picked up. Performance might start to drop. But also just behaviours around, you know, somebody being a little bit shorter than they would normally be, a little bit more short-tempered, not getting involved in stuff as much. It is picking up on those signals and encouraging that within an organisation, that it's okay to ask somebody how they are, and you know, yeah, and I think regular check-ins, regular time to make sure that you are prioritising people, it is so important.
I want to be really real about this. You've said regular check-ins, so that takes time. We have very little time. And the one thing that I hear from the sort of hard hat industries is that managers actually fear this conversation. And fear feels like quite a strong word for this, but they fear this very, what can only be described as a human conversation. Is that something you see in Cadent? How have you tackled that?
We definitely see that, because, you know, and people have probably heard this a lot of times, that managers are promoted for their technical skills, not necessarily for their people manager skills. And we encourage, you know, we promote people without giving them necessarily those people. We expect people just to know how to manage somebody from a personal perspective, and it doesn't come natural for people. So it's really important. That's something that we've done with your help, Eileen, is training managers around effective conversations and normalizing it. It's not a conversation when somebody is struggling with mental health. It's just a normal human conversation, and acknowledging that doesn't come natural for everybody, and that's absolutely fine. But it is a skill, I think, that everybody can learn, and giving managers just little simple tricks around, actually, what's the worst that can happen? We're giving them the tools, the toolkit, to be able to manage a conversation so they're not going into it scared.
Yeah, and you know, sorry, go on, Tony.
Yeah, I would say, can I pick on what Rebecca said, because I think it's really important. If I bring back, just put it into the safety, I suppose, from a general review, one of the best ways that leaders can get their feedback is through safety tours. Now, some people are absolute naturals at it, and some people really, really struggle with it. And it is back to that ability to have conversations. And teaching leaders to do safety tours and realize that they're not, when they're doing a safety tour, they're leading, not managing. So they don't need to know everything. They don't go out there and say what's going on, that sort of area. Some of the best, actually, I found is things like HR managers or finance managers doing safety tours, because they have no technical knowledge. And I did some work teaching them, and it's like, you know, some really simple questions. One, don't have a one-to-one conversation. I'll have a conversation with a group, because you're senior. Yeah, if there's a group of them, they'll feel safer. Just a little tip. Yeah. Say, just turn around and say, I know nothing on the technicalities. If this was my first day on the job as your apprentice, what would you tell me?
Love that. And there's vulnerability as well.
Absolutely. Something about, you know, another one I use is always, if I gave you Harry Potter's wand, what's the one thing you would change to make it safer?
Yeah.
You know,
Nice.
they're open questions. And the thing about that is you're no longer a manager, you're trying to be a leader, and a leader needs to listen. So listen on your safety tours, feed that back to the boardroom. Most boardrooms will have some KPI that says safety tours, yeah, and it'll be a number. Dave will know exactly where I'm going with this. And then what's the conversation in the boardroom? Have we made our safety tours? Good, let's move on. So what happens if the CEO, the chairman board says, okay, I'm going to ask one of you, what's the most important thing you've learned from a safety tour, your safety tours? And what can I do to help you with that? Yeah,
that's a fabulous change
little
on a
tip.
metric. Yeah, really
it's just a simple change. And Rebecca's right. It's opening that vulnerability. Well, maybe the CEO, I don't know everything, so tell me. And it's just, you know, you don't have to, it's not a great opening of the fact I don't know how to manage the finances. It's just, what can I do to help?
Yeah. And you know, very, very clearly, you're not measuring an input of how many visits, you're measuring an output of what did we learn in the visit. Dave, you have been doing a knowing smile throughout all of that. What are you thinking?
No, I mean, I'm not going to say we've got it right for 1 minute. We're a bastion of perfection, but it's something we're desperately trying to do, and move on from. You know, we've done I don't know, 500 of these. We've got the right balance. Safety. I'll call it safety. Okay, because of what we do is everyone's responsibility. If you're setting a budget, if you're recruiting someone, if you're agreeing something with the economic regulator, if you're buying stuff, if you're operating valves in the field, whatever. If you work here, you are connected to a major accident hazard asset. You know, a huge pipeline system full of natural gas. You are in this. So we've got the right balance, and that those safety visits are getting into functions that you wouldn't traditionally think about going. So you go into finance. So when you set a budget, how do you think about this stuff? What kind of stuff do you take into account? So we're looking at that, and what do we do with it? You know, it's just taking numbers in now. It does that. That's no good. It's so what have you learned? What are we doing with it? What are the themes? How are we going to use this to inform and shape and help us think through what we're going to do? And celebrating that. Yeah, really getting into that. And it's a bit like the fourth bridge, this stuff, isn't it? If you get to the end, you're going to have to go back to the start.
Absolutely.
And get your paintbrush out and start again. You're never going to end. It's a continuous process, and people change, and therefore you've got to change, and you've got to keep it moving and fresh and I think,
I mean, I was literally just thinking that the fact that this is a continual process. You know, if you don't keep at it, it's the same as anything. If you stand still, you actually fall back. And yes, we're always changing, new dynamics are at play, and this isn't about, are we just on top of the technical safety aspects? It's the human aspects, isn't it? My comments in the chat, what did you learn from the shop floor? Because if we're trying to keep the shop floor safe, then we need to learn what's going on the shop floor and what does and doesn't work. So we need to listen. And that's a really strong message I'm getting out of all of this, is that we need to have that feedback mechanism, that ability to listen, really, truly listen. I'm going to carry on the conversation for a few more minutes, but if you do have any questions, then please pop them in the chat or the Q&A, and we will definitely get to them. Tony, you look like you were about to say something there.
It's about actually this vulnerability side of stuff, and that's where I come back to constantly. What are we talking about? Yeah, and if you can't take that accident causation model I've been on about, you have events, you have controls, you have the immediate cause of the person, you have the environment, and you have the organizational issues that create the environment. And I think it's really important, if you learn to sit in a meeting where people are having conversations, it can be about safety, it can be about finance, and just get used to ticking a little box that say they're talking about the event, they're talking about the control, they're talking about the person, or are they talking about the systemic organisational stuff? And just keep an idea of where the conversation is, because it's a fantastic indicator of how open your organisation is. And it can be anything. I was sitting in an event review, minor gas leak on a piece of instrument pipe work on an offshore platform, and the investigation team was telling us what had happened, and they went, yep, and this particular pipe work isn't inspected, it's not on the contractor's inspection, and therefore we need to get it on, and this was the cause of the incident because it wasn't on there. And the senior manager just piped in and went, how are we incentivising the contractor that they thought it was right not to do that? And you could see the room go, oh, vulnerability. You know, where are our fingerprints?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the room just changed. That one question, there was a sudden, you could see pennies drop that said, and you know, from blame the individual. Well, if you can't blame the individual, blame the contractor. If you can't do that, blame the temp that left last week type scenario. But it's that vulnerability of where are our fingerprints? Yeah, that we created the environment, and why, whatever it was, finance, quality, supply, safe, doesn't matter, where are our fingerprints and the way we managed to create the environment that people thought they were doing the right thing.
And I think, as you say, you know, the plural of fingerprints, it's very unusual for it to be one person's touch point with something in the system which creates the incident. You know, certainly what we've tried to depict with Cadent, that actually everybody is responsible for safety. There's lots of fingerprints across the whole scope, and therefore everyone has a touch point and an ability to affect a change when it comes to safety.
And when go ahead, Rebecca.
I was just going to say, one of the things is that people in the organisation often have the answers, but we don't go to them.
Absolutely.
And including everybody within that decision, what could we have done better? But looking at it very broad, it helps to actually tease out those solutions. But also, one of the really key things is it makes an individual feel valued, and that has a massive impact on well-being, but then their involvement going forward. So the more that actually you can ask people, seek their opinions, you get a much better culture and improve their well-being, because we all want to feel that we're valued for the work that we're doing, for the contributions that we make. So it really does have a great impact on culture the more that you ask and seek solutions from everybody across the organisation.
Yeah, and by its nature, you know, culture is holistic. It has to be the whole organisation. And you know, I'm so chuffed to be working with Cadent, who recognise that. Yeah, we've worked with you on a health and safety conference, but we're now working on you on all of the workforce, and that's because you are affecting a cultural change, or deepening your culture of safety, I should say. It has to be everybody and a whole approach. Tony, you're going to say something.
Yeah, because the wonderful statement is, when you actually understand what happened and you've had those conversations about where the fingerprints are, that's when learning can start. Because if you don't understand, you can't learn. And it is that understanding, and Rebecca's absolutely right. The answers are probably back in the workforce, because they're the people who are saying it. And if you can create that conversation going round and say, this is what we've learned, this is where we're fingerprints, and then how do we fix it? They'll probably tell you how to fix it. They know the job better than you do.
Absolutely.
And Leslie, I wonder whether you could help me out with the Q&A. I don't seem to be able to access Q&A. You wouldn't mind letting me know if there's a comment or a question in there, that would be great. And whilst Leslie does that, I am going to challenge you all with a final question. I am going to take Tony's Harry Potter wand, and I'm going to give you all a version of that. And you are going to wave your magic wand and affect a magical moment of change in safety. What would that be? But first, Leslie, are you able to access the Q&A? Is that working for you?
I can see the Q&A. We've had no questions, but we've had a lovely comment from Max Ted about loving the comment that Tony made when he was talking about how we learn from the shop floor. So that obviously resonated with Mike. So it's good to get that feedback.
Wonderful. Thanks, Leslie. So are we ready with our magic wands in our final few moments together? Who would like to cast their spell first on the world of safety? Leaders in particular.
I will go first.
Okay.
So mine is around hoping that everybody can start to develop this open-mindedness with curiosity, because we look at things through our own lenses, and we've got to be able to look at things a lot wider. And well, that was what I would give, is that people that multi-lens, so that they can look at things a much broader, look at it from different perspectives, because that's the only way you're going to understand what's going wrong, why is it going wrong, what you're doing well, what's impacting on great behaviour as well as poor behaviour. So yeah, that would be my magic wand, a multi-lens view.
Multi-lens view, I love that. That actually feeds into a question, but I will come back to that in a sec. Dave, what are you doing with your magic wand?
Wait, waving it around at the minute. Well, there's something about humility. There's something for me. I'm going to try something I try. Try and listen. Try and be humble. Try and engage. Something around humility throughout the organisation.
Okay.
Basic humility, and I think Tony said a few things. It's about appreciation. It's about the first words that should come out your mouth, the thank you, which all in my mind it stems from humility. I don't know, humility stems from humility is a base.
Yeah, and that rings so true of a lot of research that's done around leadership, the servant leader. And a servant leader, of course, is there to serve and is therefore humble. So we've got a multi-lens, an open-mindedness, we've got humility and some very human traits here. Tony, I'm going to let you have the wand as well that you created. And at the same time, I'm just going to let you know there's a question. Mike wants to know, you've mentioned celebrating the correct safety behaviours rather than just the outcomes. Can you give some concrete examples of what this looks like in practice? Specifically, how do you identify the right moment to reward, and what does that recognition actually look like on the ground?
There's a very famous one from the US Navy. Probably one of the most dangerous parts in the world is the deck of an aircraft carrier during operations. And during one major NATO exercise, the most junior fitter couldn't find his spanner. Now, on a flight deck, leaving a spanner on a flight deck is absolutely lethal. He immediately reported it. All operations were shut down. The flight deck was closed in the middle of a major exercise. He went back and found it in his locker and went and immediately said, "I've found it in his locker." The admiral commanding the vessel then got everyone on parade and publicly thanked him for reporting it.
Wow.
Because that's the behaviour he wanted. That's still probably the most famous example I know of thanking people for doing the right thing. If somebody shuts a plant down or stops operations, thank you for doing it. It's really difficult to say that. And my magic wand, is encourage reds and challenge greens.
Love that. Wonderful. Some amazing insight, and the stories have been fantastic. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Rebecca. We've got some really rich insight here, some tips, some wonderful stories, and some very, very human traits that we would like to see and encourage development of in our leaders. So thank you so much for joining me today. And we will send the recording out. Let's watch it all again. Let's learn all over again and take this into our practice day to day. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Eileen Donnelly. I'm from Ripple&Co. If you'd like to know more about what we have been doing with Cadent Gas to improve the human factors of health and safety, then please do get in touch. But bye for now.
Thanks, Eileen.
Cheers.